Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've started to kind of call experience-driven design, and I'll kind of get into what I mean by that just shortly. So I am geemus online or Wesley Beary. My avatar usually accompanies that, so if you see either of those things, it's probably me. And so a lot of this came from when I was kind of getting, I was a kid. I wanted to grow up and do something cool. So really my dream job was to be able to go and be creative professionally. And over time this has changed a lot in terms of what that actually meant. I just found out maybe I was wrong about how I was going to do that. But throughout, I think it's been pretty clear to me that what needed to happen was I needed to be one of these guys. I needed to be an expert because by being an expert, I could probably get people to pay me to be, expertise riddled or what have you. And then I could be creative. So the problem was when you're first getting started, you are not a big titan in the industry, you're not an expert, and it's really scary. Like you don't know how to get started, you don't know who to talk to, or what to do. So one thing I really want to encourage people to do is to be really tenacious and just be brave and put yourself out there because it's definitely worth it. So for me, when I was first getting started, things were kind of scary, and so I started with kind of simple stuff. For me, this was Rails and Active Record and MySQL. I didn't know very much web programming at that point, so this was very much an entry point. I kind of got my feet wet. I tried some stuff. I learned, and it was very nice. For this, it was all about just consuming existing libraries. I wasn't really writing new libraries. I was just trying to do my best to keep my head above water and learn some stuff. From there, though, I moved on and I kind of got into this stage where I thought, what if this, or if only this thing was true? So from there, I actually started to write some of my own code. There was a small library called Access Taggable Redux that was for doing tagging stuff in Rails, and I started to write patches for other libraries because I found little bits and pieces where they didn't quite do what I wanted. So really I was starting to explore the Ruby ecosystem, which I would really encourage all of you to do if you haven't already. So then I started to move on from there, and the next thing that I started to come across were really very new projects that hadn't received very much attention yet, that not everyone was using, that it seemed like they really needed some help. Not because there weren't talented people working on them, but just because they had so few people working on them already that I could really come in and make a significant contribution because not everything was already taken care of. I felt like with something like Rails, I didn't even know what to work on because there were so many people already working on so many different things, I didn't know where to start. So for me, this was all about contribution. I started working on a lot of projects and trying to help out any way that I could because it was really interesting to me and I felt really good to be able to help out. And from there, it kind of started to spiral out of control. This is where really I stopped even really just contributing to projects and started writing a lot of my own projects from scratch. A couple early examples were Google Ajax or SimpleDB, little libraries that did something interesting that I couldn't find an existing library for yet. And this is insanity. It starts to get really out of control. You start writing lots and lots of code that maybe already exists somewhere else just because it's a lot of fun. So it gets crazy, and you'll have people tell you that you've run into NIH, not invented here, that you just want to write stuff because you think you can do it better than anyone else or something like that. And I think that's kind of not really something that you should worry about at all. I think that there is a time and place where it's more important to get things done than to write code that will be interesting. But I also definitely think there's a place and time to write interesting code because you're going to learn stuff and it will be great for you even if nobody else ever sees the code or uses it. So it is a slippery slope, but I think that it is not the end of the road for you. The other thing that you really need to be aware about as you get more and more into open source is there will be explosions. There will be things that will break. You'll write code that you think is great and then find out that the 3 users that you've managed to get to work on your project, it broke everything that they were doing. So you have to go back to the drawing board and fix it. Or that people just don't understand what you're trying to do. Like you've been working on it for months and months and you think it's the best thing and they just don't understand why the library even exists in the first place or why. So again, I want to encourage you really to just keep coming back for more. Even though there will be some setbacks, in the end, it is definitely worth the effort to stick out. So from there, that's kind of like, in general, the experience that I've had working on open source and how that has driven my development. But also I wanted to talk a little bit about how that's influenced my views on what you should actually try to do when you are writing code for open source projects. So one of the first things that I think is really important to realize is that problems are complicated. Looking at this picture, I would think that I could probably never fly an airplane because I don't even know what any of these things are, and there are so many of them that I would just be scared that I would crash. So I think an important thing for libraries to do is to try to lower the barrier to entry for people that are using them. So you don't want it to be something that's limited to experts. You want anybody to be able to come in and do whatever it is that your library does. That is what you should strive to do. So to kind of sum that up, if you aren't the pilot, all you want to do is land the plane. You don't want to do loop-de-loops or spirals or anything really crazy. You just want to make sure that you get down safely. So the thing to remember as you're working on these libraries is you are the expert. You shouldn't expect that your users are going to be the experts on whatever you're working on. You need to take care of that for them. And so one of the things that I do that I think has been really valuable for me is I have a separate project that's just called prototypes. And so into this go little projects like this that just do various things where I want to try something out. I don't know if I'm ever going to use it anywhere, but I want to be able to just try it, learn some things, see if it might work. And I think by setting it aside in a particular place like this, it makes it very clear to anyone that might stumble across it that it was something I was playing with, but they maybe shouldn't like put it in their big website that has 1 million users because everything might come tumbling down. It was a toy for me. But I think that this is really great because it encourages me, since I have my little sandbox, to go off and write code and learn. So the next thing is this is a monkey patch. And I want to encourage you to realize that this is very bad. Because if you do have monkey patches, you're running into a problem where if someone else happens to patch the same thing as you, depending on what order the things get loaded in, the person's program that is using it might be completely different. So this kind of goes back to the expertise thing. You should be the expert. You shouldn't expect that your user would need to know that things need to be in a certain order in order to actually work. It should just work regardless of what else is going on, if at all possible. So I think that this is something that really needs to be avoided in order for that to be possible. The other thing is that I think it's really valuable to release your software very early in its life. And the reason for that is similar to what I mentioned earlier. It's really, really hard to figure out exactly what all of your users are actually going to need. And frequently you might think you know, but you might be wrong. So it's very valuable to start getting people using it and looking at it so that you can get feedback and really tune it to be the best library that it can be. Related to that, I think it's great to also release very often. My primary project these days is Fog, which is a cloud library, and it has over 138 versions now, and it's a little bit more than a year old. And for this particular project, there are already a number of people that use it. So if somebody gives me a patch that fixes something, I'll almost always try to release at least a patched version for them because I assume that if they took the time to write a patch for me, they actually need that patch for something that they're working on. So it's very valuable for them to have that as soon as possible in a way that they can use it very easily. The next thing that's really important, I think, is that documentation really matters. Not everyone is going to be able to find you on IRC or chat to you or send you an email, and they're going to want to know how to use your library. So the more that you can provide those kind of answers to people in an easily consumable format right out of the gate, the better off you're going to be. But it's a lot harder than it looks. I personally am kind of really bad at this, and I need to work on it, and I try, and I fail a lot. So one of the things that I do to kind of fill in that gap is what I call tutorializing, I guess, which is sort of trying to put myself out there and trying to be in IRC rooms and trying to answer emails and fix bugs and anything else that comes up just because I know that people need that help and that the documentation isn't great. But it's important to realize that this doesn't scale. I can only do this as long as the user base stays relatively small. So the next thing I think is really important is that you should encourage contributors. If people come in and they write you patches, they're helping you out, it's worth your while to make sure that they know that you really appreciate that. So one thing that I've done that has been very well received is to hand out swag. So I have stickers, like is on the back of my laptop here, that I hand out to pretty much anybody that wants one. But I also give out T-shirts usually to people that write patches so that I can really show, like, maybe this isn't a big deal that you got a T-shirt, but I just want you to know that I really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. It is work that I did not have to do. So you should definitely encourage contributors because they are awesome. And the next thing that's really important, I think, is to be very consistent. It makes it much easier for someone that's new coming in to figure out what's going on and to adapt and to expand on things if it's consistent. And if you make sure to keep consistency across things that are coming in from other people, it makes it a lot easier for you when a bug comes in and you don't know what's wrong because it's a piece of code you didn't write. As long as it's relatively consistent, it makes it much easier to actually keep up on that. So I just really want to emphasize that. And the next thing I think is really important is to try to keep your library very focused. You don't want a library that does 100 million different things because it will just be confusing. Like, why would somebody use your library? You should be able to tell them in a sentence or two, this is what my library is for, this is why you should use it. So for me, a couple examples were XCon, which is an HTTP library, or Formatador, which is just for doing command line formatting. They don't do anything else. They used to be parts of Fog. Like originally there was just a class in Fog that did these things, but they started to become so large and so much of their own thing that I pulled them out so that it wouldn't be confusing what you would use Fog for. This is a particular thing that you use by itself that Fog happens to also use as a dependency, and so might you. The other thing that I think is really important is that as you work and as you get to bigger and bigger libraries, it's important to have good tools to work on those libraries with. So some of my libraries have actually become tools that I use for other libraries towards those ends. So a few examples are, I wrote a library to make it easier for me to capture backtraces and analyze them, and I wrote my own test framework, and I wrote a benchmarking tool, all towards the ends of trying to improve performance or to test things in a way that seemed to make more sense to me, or so on and so forth. But by having all of these tools, it makes it much more easy for me to move forward with things because I'm very familiar with them. And the last thing I think is that you should try to fall gracefully. I have a number of libraries here that I worked on sometimes for weeks, and now will probably never touch again because I realized they were a terrible idea, that I just should maybe not have gone down that path in the first place. So I think it's important that we realize that it's okay that we don't always write the best code ever, and that we can admit that maybe we didn't do something great, because through doing that we'll learn a lot, and I think if we can together do some of these things, that eventually we can all soar. And so for me, here's a cool example, is that not too long ago I was actually trending on Twitter enough that this is the front page of, trending on GitHub enough that I was on the front page of GitHub. If you just went to github.com, you saw my repository. So this was a big win for me. I was very excited. And even beyond that, I work at Engine Yard, and this hasn't really been publicly announced yet, but as of September 1st, I'll actually be working full-time on one of my open source projects, which I was amazed to find out and is really exciting for me. It maybe isn't something that everyone can necessarily achieve, but I think I had achieved so much and was so happy with what I had learned that this is just kind of icing on the cake. So this was a really epic win for me. And I have t-shirts too, by the way, for Engine Yard if anybody wants one. And I think that's it. If anybody has questions, I would love to answer them for you.
If you have any question, he will bring your microphone. So please raise your hand.
Oh, it's on. There we go. So on fog, like what motivated you to originally create fog? I would guess like, hey, dealing with different cloud providers is painful, but one of the, at least when I came upon it, one of the really awesome things about it was like, wow, someone supports the Rackspace API. Like, I would imagine if most people, well, maybe at least in the States, most people who are deploying to the cloud are going to EC2. So for those other providers, was that like you saying, I personally have a need for this, or was that contributors?
It varied some. I think it kind of goes back to the release early, release often kind of mentality. There were a few cases where people either contributed code that just actually provided support for something that they had been working on or were interested with. In a lot of cases, it's just that as I dug deeper and deeper, I became really interested in the whole ecosystem. So several of them, I was just interested. I wanted to try it out, see, what's the performance like, or how are these two APIs different. And as they were coming out, like the Rackspace one was completely just my curiosity. I wanted to see what it was like. It was still really new. It was still in beta, and I wanted to try it. And there wasn't an existing library or an easy way to try it necessarily. So I just kind of hacked something out over a short period, and then it grew from there because it turns out after I tried it that I kind of liked the Rackspace API. So I had fleshed it out some more so I could try more of the sort of idiosyncrasies. So part of it's been that, but then other things like the Terramark vCloud support was interesting to me at first, but a lot of that work has actually gone on because the Engineered's xCloud product happens to use Terramark vCloud. So at the very beginning, it was kind of a coincidence, but then as it became clear that we were going to use that, it got more and more work done from other people at Engineered on it. So I would say it's kind of a mix, but it's definitely been strongly influenced by those people that have already started using it, I think. All right. Since it doesn't seem like there are any more questions, I think I'll go ahead and sit down and we'll have a couple minutes of break maybe before the next speaker. So thank you very much.